back to another episode of 5 Minutes with Jesus and Jesse. I am coming to you from our friend's house in Nebraska, so that's why there's a change of scenery. And Crew is currently hiding under the bed and is supposed to be being quiet. So if you hear any rustling, that's him. Okay, so I am reading Craig Groeschel's new book, The Benefit of Doubt. And if you've not read it, I highly recommend it because it really is just so helpful for any of us believers who at some point in our walk have felt doubt creep in. And instead of shaming somebody for having doubts in their faith, he uses that as an opportunity to just grow your faith closer with Christ. So if you haven't read this book, it is amazing. And there was one part of this past week that really stuck out to me that I wanted to talk about today. So the chapter was, why does God feel so far away? And I don't know about you guys, but sometimes it just feels like God is far away. Like I'm not hearing from him like I did at a certain point in my life. Maybe I'm not hearing from him like some of my friends are, or maybe it's just not what I expected it to be. And so Craig lays out some things in this chapter that have really helped me understand that maybe God hasn't been distant and maybe it's been me or I just perceived a distance. So he starts out by talking about David, the guy after God's own heart. And in Psalm 88, David writes, I cry out to you for help, Lord. In the morning my prayer comes before you. Why, Lord, do you reject me and hide your face from me? And then in Psalm 13, he says, how long, Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? So David, the guy after God's own heart, struggled at a point in his life where he thought God had forsaken him and God was distant from him. And I couldn't believe that. Just David, like really? He had this experience. And then Jesus himself, Craig points out, wrote in Matthew 27, my God, why have you forsaken me? So if Jesus himself, who lived perfectly without sin here on earth, who did not feel the presence of God at some point in his years here on earth, then how do we think that we're always going to be in this constant, relationship where we're getting feedback all the time, like constant feedback? So Craig breaks down some reasons as to why we may not feel God's presence at a certain point in our life. And I really love this because this is where it really came apparent to me that God isn't far away. So the first thing that he talks about is you might sensationalize God's presence. So he points out that our feelings are not the only evidence of God's presence in our life. And so what he means by that is that we don't always have to have some supernatural experience to believe or to know that God is present in our lives. And those encounters may actually be more rare than they are common. So maybe you hear God speak to you, or maybe you get the chills, or you feel his presence, or there's a sign, like a miraculous sign that you have in your life. And those things are amazing. And they give you this sort of high that, that you're like, yes, I know, you feel so reassured. But those aren't the only things that we can rely on as believers. And so he says, if we always felt God, then we wouldn't need faith. And I was like, wow, that makes so much sense. Because if you were constantly having these miraculous encounters, you wouldn't need the faith part to walk with God. And so I maybe have been relying more on my feelings than my faith. And I was like, wow. He said you might actually have a hard heart. So maybe you don't feel near to him because your hearts have actually hardened. And there was two things that Craig said could lead to this, was bitterness and sinfulness. And so maybe God didn't answer a prayer how you expected, or he didn't answer it at all, or he responded differently than what you thought he should. And little by little, we have these disappointments that kind of build up, and it creates this bitterness in our heart that is so subtle sometimes we don't even know it's there. Or maybe it's sin, and not just an occasional sin, but like setting a sin milestone. So I talked about this in my Awake, O Sleeper video that I posted recently. And if you were setting a next sin milestone, knowing that you are going to sin again, that is what he's talking about. Those are the things that can keep you from hearing from God or feeling his presence, because the sin allows our hearts to be hardened, just like layers, and you become further and further away. It kind of just separates you. And we might prioritize performance. So maybe instead of living, from God's grace and approval, we're living for it. And this one cut deep for me too, because this is exactly how I was living for several years. I was doing all the things, going through all the motions, but I never truly had a change from the inside out. And as Craig put it, there has to be a shift from doing religious duties for God to living in genuine devotion of God. And so God will always lead us to seek him. So he wants us to live close to him and live dependent on him. He wants us to seek him, just as he said in Matthew 7, seek and you will find, knock and the door will be open to you. He's never far away from us. And we may just be far away from him. Craig reminds us that just because he feels distant does not mean that he's absent. So what has it been for you? Are you living out of true obedience for God, or are you just going through the motions? Are you allowing what God hasn't done to harden your heart? Or are you setting a next sin milestone? Or are we just relying on our feelings more than our faith? God has promised to never leave and forsake you, and he is here ready and waiting for you. But where are you?